Big Van Vader possessed the strength to push his own eyeball back into his skull on live television. Yet Leon White was too broken to save his own failing heart. He built a monster to protect his fragile ego, only to be slowly eaten alive by the very character he created. He was a god in Japan, a reject in America, and a Hall of Famer only after he was safely in the ground. This isn't just a wrestling story. It is the autopsy of Big Van Vader, the man who murdered himself for your applause. Leon Allen White entered the world on May 14th, 1955, in Linwood, California. From his first breath, he was a statistical outlier. In the 1950s, the average American male stood about 5'8". Leon's growth chart didn't just curve upwards, it went vertical. By the time he was in elementary school, Leon was already experiencing the profound isolation of the giant child. It is a specific psychological burden to be physically mature while emotionally an infant. Adults expect more from you. Other children fear you. Teachers assume you are a bully simply because you occupy more space than the other students. Growing up in the concrete sprawl of Los Angeles County, Leon learned early that his size was his defining characteristic. It was the first thing people noticed, and often the only thing they cared about. He wasn't just Leon, he was Big Leon. He was a spectacle, but nature had played a cruel trick on him. Usually gigantism comes with a price: clumsiness, slow reflexes, a skeletal structure that groans under the load. Leon was different. He had the fast twitch muscle fibers of a sprinter wrapped in the chassis of a tank. He could dunk a basketball. He could run a 40-yard dash in times that embarrassed men half his size. This combination, mass plus acceleration, is the most coveted commodity in American culture. In a society obsessed with sports, Leon White wasn't just a big kid. He was a winning lottery ticket. At Bell Gardens High School, Leon became a local legend. On the football field, he was a man among boys. High school football is often a game of mismatches, but Leon was a systemic failure for the opposing team. There was no technique to stop him. If you put two blockers on him, he ran through them. If you ran away from him, he chased you down. He lived in the weight room. While other teenagers were discovering rebellion and rock and roll, Leon was discovering the iron. He found solace in the gym. The weights didn't judge him. The weights didn't stare at him. If he put 300 pounds on the bar respected him. If he put 400 pounds on, the bar bowed. He sculpted his body not for aesthetics, but for violence. He learned that his body was a tool. It was a battering ram. And he learned that when he used that battering ram to smash into another human being, people cheered. The isolation of his childhood vanished when he put on a helmet. On the field, he wasn't a freak. He was a hero. This validation is addictive. For a young man trying to find his place in the world, the roar of a Friday night crowd is a powerful drug. It taught Leon a dangerous lesson that would haunt him for the rest of his life. You are worthy of love only when you are hurting people. The college recruiters came calling like vultures, circling a fresh kill. Every major program wanted the monster from Linwood. He chose the University of Colorado. Moving from the sun-baked streets of California to the high altitude of Boulder, Colorado, was a culture shock, but Leon adapted. He was there for one reason: to make the NFL college football in the mid-1970s was a brutal, unforgiving landscape. It was the era before concussion protocols, before heavily regulated contact practices, and before player safety was a marketing slogan. It was a meat grinder. Leon played on the offensive line. To the casual observer, the offensive line is a blur of bodies. To the expert, it is a sumo match that happens 60 times a game. It is a world of leverage, hand placement, and pure unadulterated aggression. Leon thrived. He was a center, the anchor of the line. He was responsible for snapping the ball and then immediately engaging with a defensive nose tackle who wanted to kill his quarterback. It is a position that requires intelligence as much as strength. You have to read defenses, call out adjustments, and then snap into violence in a fraction of a second. At Colorado, Leon White became an All-American. This is not a casual honor. It means you are one of the best players in the entire country at your position. It means you are elite. He was a physical marvel. He played at a weight of around 285 pounds, but he carried it with zero body fat. He was a wall of muscle. He was known for his mean streak. He didn't just block people, he finished them. He would drive defenders into the dirt and land on top of them, ensuring they felt every ounce of his weight. His senior year was a masterclass in dominance. The Colorado Buffaloes were a powerhouse, and Leon was the engine. He was the team captain, the leader. He was the guy the coaches pointed to when they wanted to show the freshmen what intensity looked like. But there were warning signs. The human body is not designed to collide with other human bodies at full speed, repeatedly, for years on end. Leon played through pain. Everybody did. It was the code. You taped it up. You took a shot. You got back in the huddle. His knees were already taking a pounding. The artificial turf of the 1970s, basically green plastic carpet laid over concrete, was a notorious destroyer of joints. Every step, every cut, every plant sent shock waves through the skeletal system. Leon ignored the aches. He had a destination. Spring 1978, the NFL draft. For a college football player, this is Judgment Day. It is the day where your entire life's work is quantified, analyzed, and purchased. Leon White didn't have to wait long. The Los Angeles Rams, his hometown team, selected him in the 3rd round with the 81st overall pick. The symmetry was perfect. The boy from Linwood was coming home a man. He was going to play in the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. He was going to wear the blue and gold. Leon signed his contract. It wasn't the multi-million-dollar deals of today, but for a 23-year-old in 1978, it was a fortune. He bought the car. He rented the nice apartment. He tasted the lifestyle. But the NFL is a business, and the Rams were contenders. They had a roster full of veterans who didn't care about his All-American status. To them, he was just meat, fresh legs to be tested. Training camp was a war of attrition. Leon had to prove he wasn't just a college star, but a professional. He had to learn the complex blocking schemes of the NFL. He had to deal with the defensive linemen who were faster, stronger, and smarter than anyone he had faced in college. And he did it. He made the team. In the 1978 season, Leon White was a Los Angeles Ram. He was living the dream. He was on the field on Sundays. He was part of the elite fraternity of men who play in the National Football League. He had made it. He felt invincible. He was young, rich, and strong. He thought he had 10 years of glory ahead of him. He thought he would be a Pro Bowler. He thought he would retire a hero. He was wrong. The 1979 season began with high hopes. The Rams were gunning for the Super Bowl. Leon was entering his 2nd year, stronger and more confident. He was finding his rhythm. Then came the moment that changed history. It wasn't a spectacular play. It wasn't a highlight reel collision. It was physics and bad luck converging in a split second. During a routine engagement, Leon planted his foot. His cleats dug into the unforgiving turf. His upper body rotated. A defender crashed into his leg. The force had nowhere to go. The patella is a small floating bone that acts as a lever for the quadriceps muscle. It allows the leg to extend. It takes immense pressure every time you step. In that fraction of a second, Leon's patella didn't just break. It exploded. The sound was audible, a sickening pop that nauseated the players near him. Leon collapsed. The pain was immediate and blinding, a white-hot spike driving through his leg and into his brain. But worse than the pain was the loss of function. He tried to move his leg and nothing happened. The connection was severed. He was carted off the field. The stadium noise faded into a dull roar. He lay on the training table, sweat cold on his forehead, as the team doctors manipulated the joint. Their faces told him everything he didn't want to hear. Ruptured patella. In 2024, this is a career-threatening injury. In 1979, it was a career-ending one. The surgery was brutal. Doctors had to wire the pieces of bone back together. They had to suture the tendons that had snapped like rubber bands. They closed his knee up with a zipper of staples. Leon woke up from anesthesia with a cast on his leg and a heavy feeling in his chest. The Rams went on a magical run that year. They fought their way through the playoffs. They reached Super Bowl 14 to face the dynastic Pittsburgh Steelers. Leon White got a Super Bowl ring, but he didn't earn it on the field in the big game. He earned it watching from the sidelines, a giant in street clothes, leaning on crutches. He looked at the ring. It was heavy. It was gold and diamonds. It said World Champion. But to Leon, it felt like a lie. It was a souvenir from a party he was kicked out of. The doctors were honest. You can't play football on that knee, Leon. The structural integrity was gone. The explosiveness, the thing that made him special, was gone. He could walk. He could eventually run awkwardly. But he could never again hold a block against a 300-pound man trying to kill him. At age 24, Leon White was retired. This is the part of the athlete's tragedy that is rarely discussed. When you spend your entire conscious life building yourself into a specific machine for a specific purpose, and that purpose is removed, you do not just lose a job, you lose your soul. Leon didn't know who he was if he wasn't a football player. Was he just a big guy? A freak? He spiraled. The depression was deep and heavy. He sat in his house staring at the walls. He looked at his trophies. They felt like artifacts from an ancient civilization. The silence that follows the end of a professional athlete's career is not peaceful. It is deafening. For Leon White, the years between 1980 and 1985 were a slow, suffocating drift through a world that had no place for him. He was a man designed for a war that had signed a peace treaty without consulting him. The shattered patella had healed into a knot of scar tissue and regret, a constant throbbing reminder of the NFL stardom that had evaporated before his eyes. He was 25, then 26, then 27, watching his prime physical years tick away on a clock he couldn't reset. He tried to play the role of a civilian. He put on the oversized suits. He squeezed his massive frame into sedans to drive potential home buyers around the suburbs of Denver and Los Angeles. He smiled. He shook hands. He pretended that closing a deal on a 3-bedroom ranch house gave him the same dopamine rush as snapping a football in front of 60,000 screaming fans. But it was a lie. Every day was a performance of normalcy that exhausted him more than any 2-a-day practice ever had. He felt like a tiger pacing in a cage, his muscles twitching with phantom energy. The gym became his only sanctuary, the iron the only thing that spoke his language. In the weight rooms of the mid-1980s, amidst the clanging plates and the smell of stale sweat, Leon continued to grow. Without the cardio-intensive demands of the gridiron, And with a calorie intake that would stun a normal family, he began to expand. He wasn't just big anymore, he was becoming colossal. He pushed 400 pounds, a density of mass that was almost gravitational. People would stop and stare at him in the supermarket, their eyes tracing the impossible width of his shoulders. They saw a monster. Leon felt like a ghost. It was in this state of desperate inertia that the idea of professional wrestling first took root. It wasn't a childhood dream. Leon was a football man, a purist who viewed sport as a binary of win or lose. Wrestling, with its predetermined outcomes and theatrical flair, had always seemed like a carnival sideshow, a bastardization of true combat. But desperation has a way of altering one's perspective. He saw men like Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant on television, men who were turning size into millions of dollars. He saw the lifestyle, the travel, the crowds, the physical collision. It was a distorted mirror of the NFL, but it was the only game in town for a man with his dimensions and a bad knee. In 1985, Leon made the call that would kill the civilian and birth the beast. He reached out to Brad Reengans, a former Olympic wrestler who ran a training camp in Minnesota. Reengans was a legitimate grappler, a man who understood the mechanics of the human body, and he saw in Leon White a raw resource of terrifying potential. But potential is not skill. The transition from football to wrestling is notoriously difficult, a fact that Leon learned the moment he hit the canvas for the first time. In football, you are trained to stay on your feet, to drive through contact, to never go down. In wrestling, the bump, the act of falling flat on your back to simulate impact, is the foundational unit of the art. The first time Leon took a flat back bump, the wind was driven from his lungs with a violence that shocked him. The ring was not a trampoline. It was a thin layer of canvas stretched over plywood and steel beams. It had all the forgiveness of a parking lot. For weeks, Leon's body was a map of bruises. His equilibrium was shattered. He had to unlearn a lifetime of football instincts. He had to learn to lead with his left, to stomp his foot to accentuate a punch, to feed his body to an opponent for a suplex. It was humiliating. Here was an all-American athlete, a man who had blocked for NFL quarterbacks, stumbling around a warehouse in Minnesota like a toddler learning to walk. But Reengans was patient. He saw the agility hidden beneath the blubber. He saw that Leon could move. Leon debuted in the American Wrestling Association later that year. The AWA, owned by the legendary Verne Gagne, was a promotion steeped in tradition, favoring real athletes over cartoon characters. It should have been the perfect fit, but the AWA of 1985 was a dying empire, crumbling under the assault of Vince McMahon's expanding WWF. They didn't know how to package a 400-pound wrecking ball. They looked at Leon's baby face, round, soft, and naturally pleasant, and decided he was a good guy. They called him Baby Bull. Baby Bull was a disaster of marketing. The name itself was a contradiction, stripping him of his inherent menace. They sent him out in plain trunks to smile and wave at the fans. The audience, sensing the disconnect, was apathetic. They didn't want to cheer for a giant who acted like a golden retriever. They wanted a giant who acted like a giant. Leon struggled. He was stiff in the ring, his movements jerky and uncertain. He was terrified of hurting people, pulling his punches so much that they looked fake, even from the cheap seats. He was trying to be a performer, playing a role he didn't understand in a company that was slowly sinking. It felt like failure was reaching out to grab him again. But the wrestling business is global, and one man's trash is another man's treasure. While the AWA didn't know what to do with Leon, A promoter across the Atlantic was watching. Otto Wanz, a former boxer and wrestler who ran the Catch Wrestling Association in Germany and Austria, was a man who appreciated size above all else. Wanz was a behemoth himself, a phone booth of a man who ruled the European circuit with an iron fist. The European style was different. It was rooted in the catch-as-catch-can tradition, grittier, stiffer, and less reliant on soap opera storylines. The matches were often contested in rounds, treated as legitimate sporting contests. The crowds in Bremen, Grace, and Vienna were rowdy, fueled by beer and bloodlust. They didn't want cartoons, they wanted gladiators. Wanz offered Leon a contract. It was a chance to escape the mediocrity of his American run. It was a chance to learn the trade in the trenches. Leon packed his bags for Europe. He arrived in a world that felt centuries removed from the glitz of American sports. The venues were smoke-filled tournament halls, smelling of stale Pilsner and bratwurst. The locker rooms were dungeons, but it was here, in the harsh light of the European circuit, that Leon White began to understand what he was. Under the tutelage of Otto Wanz, the baby bull persona was stripped away. Wanz didn't want Leon to be nice, he wanted him to be heavy. "Use your weight," Wanz would bark. "Make them feel you." Leon learned the art of the snug work style. In America, the goal was often to make contact as light as possible while making it look hard. In Europe, the philosophy was to hit them hard enough that they didn't have to sell it, but safe enough that they could wake up the next morning. It was a fine line, a razor's edge of violence that Leon walked every night. He began to realize that his body was a weapon. When he cornered an opponent, he didn't need to act. He just needed to lean. When he threw a forearm, he stopped pulling it. He let the mass of his arm connect, feeling the satisfying thud of bone on bone. The European crowds responded. They didn't cheer for him. They gasped at him. They watched in awe as this massive American moved with a speed that defied physics. He was rechristened Bull Power, a name that still lacked the mythical quality of his future, but at least acknowledged his strength. The seminal moment of his European excursion came when he was booked to face Otto Wanz himself for the CWA World Heavyweight Championship. Wanz had held the title for years, a stranglehold that seemed unbreakable. The match was a passing of the torch, a collision of two titans. In the ring with Wanz, Leon didn't have to hold back. Wanz was a brick wall. Leon smashed into him, unleashing the frustration of the last 7 years. He battered the legend. He threw his body around with reckless abandon. And when the referee counted 3, signaling the end of Wanz's reign and the beginning of Leon's, something clicked. Holding that belt, hearing the roar of the German crowd, Leon felt a surge of validation that the NFL had denied him. It wasn't the Super Bowl. It wasn't the cover of Sports Illustrated. But it was respect. He was the champion of a territory. He was the man. The insecurity that had plagued him since his knee surgery began to recede, replaced by a growing arrogance. He was good at this. He was unmatched at this. But the CWA was still a carnival, albeit a rougher one. The schedule was grueling. The travel was lonely. Leon was an outsider in a foreign land, navigating a culture he didn't fully understand. He was drinking more, eating more, trying to maintain the massive physique that was his ticket to a paycheck. The pain in his knees never truly went away. It just became a background noise, a static hum that he learned to ignore with the help of anti-inflammatories and alcohol. He was building a tolerance for suffering that would eventually become his undoing. As 1987 approached, Leon White was a big fish in a medium-sized pond. He had conquered Europe. He had proven he wasn't just a washed-up football player, but he was still looking for the stage that could contain him. He needed a platform where his monstrous size could be elevated to the level of myth. He needed a place that understood the theater of the grotesque. Fate was preparing another plane ticket. In Tokyo, the office of New Japan Pro Wrestling was looking for a villain. They didn't want a bull. They wanted something far more terrifying. They were about to hand Leon White a mask that would change the trajectory of his life forever. The apprenticeship was over. The monster was about to be unleashed. By late 1987, Leon White was a man in search of a defining context. He had the size of a tectonic plate and the aggression of a wounded animal. But in the beer halls of Germany, he was merely a spectacle. He was Bull Power, a name that sounded like a brand of malt liquor. He was effective. He was making money, but he wasn't legendary. He was a mercenary selling his body by the pound. Across the globe in the neon-soaked sprawl of Tokyo, New Japan Pro Wrestling was facing a crisis. The company was built on the back of Antonio Inoki, a man who was less a wrestler and more a cultural deity. Inoki was the embodiment of fighting spirit. He had fought Muhammad Ali to a draw. He was the rugged chin of Japanese masculinity. But every hero needs a dragon to slay, and Inoki was running out of dragons. The roster of foreign villains, Gaijin, was stale. They needed something new. They needed something that didn't look like a wrestler. They needed an apocalypse. Masa Saito, a respected Japanese wrestler and liaison for NJPW, had seen tapes of the massive American in Europe. He saw the way Leon moved. He saw the frightening snap in his hips when he delivered a suplex. Saito convinced the NJPW office to buy out Leon's contract from Ottawans. They brought him to Tokyo, not to be Leon White, but to be the living avatar of a Japanese pop culture myth. The transformation was total. When Leon arrived in Japan, they didn't hand him a pair of trunks and tell him to go wrestle. They handed him a suit of armor. The gimmick was Big Van Vader. It was originally based on a character from Japanese folklore and a popular manga. The centerpiece was the helmet, a massive, hideous black skull made of fiberglass and steel, weighing nearly 10 pounds on its own. It was designed to spit smoke, creating a cloud of noxious vapor as he marched to the ring. Putting on that helmet for the first time was a claustrophobic experience. It limited his vision. It was heavy. It smelled of industrial glue. But when Leon looked in the mirror, Leon White was gone. The failed football player, the man with the bad knees and the uncertain future, had vanished. In his place was a faceless, emotionless juggernaut. The mask liberated him. It allowed him to turn off the human empathy that holds most of us back from true violence. His debut was scheduled for December 27, 1987, at the Ryogoku Sumo Hall. This venue is hallowed ground in Japan. It is the cathedral of sumo, a place of ritual and respect. The main event was Antonio Inoki versus Riki Choshu. The crowd was hot, anticipating a classic technical struggle. Instead, they got a massacre. Vader was introduced not as a wrestler, but as a force of nature. He marched down the ramp, the smoke billowing from his helmet, his massive frame blocking out the lights. He stepped over the ropes. He didn't climb through them. He stepped over them. And the atmosphere in the building shifted from excitement to confusion. Who was this? What was this? The bell rang. In a script that defied all wrestling logic of the time, Vader didn't grapple with Inoki. He annihilated him. He threw the Japanese legend around with a disregard that bordered on contempt. He hit Inoki with clotheslines that sounded like gunshots. In less than 3 minutes, Big Van Vader pinned Antonio Inoki. To understand the magnitude of this, You have to understand that Inoki simply did not lose like this. He was Superman. For him to be squashed by an unknown foreigner in minutes was sacrilege. It was as if Rocky Balboa had been knocked out in the first round by a random stranger. The audience at Sumo Hall didn't gasp. They didn't boo. They snapped. A low rumble started in the stands, the sound of thousands of people collectively losing their minds. Then, the seat cushions started flying. In Japan, throwing your seat cushion is usually a sign of respect for a great sumo match. This was not that. This was artillery fire. Debris rained down on the ring. Then came the chairs. Then came the fire. Furious fans, feeling cheated and insulted, began tearing the venue apart. They set small fires in the aisles. They rioted. NJPW was banned from Sumo Hall, their home arena, for over a year because of the damage. In the locker room, Leon White sat drenched in sweat, listening to the chaos outside. He had done his job too well. He had generated heat, the wrestler's term for negative audience reaction. But this was nuclear heat. He wasn't just a bad guy. He was a public enemy. He had walked into the temple and killed the god. The riot defined him. From that night on, Vader was the top gaijin in Japan. But a shocking debut is only a moment. A career is built on the grind. The years 1988 and 1989 were the crucible that forged Leon into one of the greatest big man workers in history. The Japanese style, known as strong style, was physically demanding in a way that American wrestling simply wasn't. It was martial arts adjacent. The kicks were real. The submissions were torqued. The mat was hard. Leon adapted. He realized that to survive in NJPW, he had to be better conditioned than he was in the NFL. He began training at the NJPW dojo, a place notorious for its Spartan conditions. He did thousands of squats. He sparred with younger wrestlers. He hardened his body. He also got bigger. The Japanese fans loved mass. To them, a giant was a thing of beauty. Leon fed the beast. He ate thousands of calories a day, steaks, rice, beer, to maintain a weight that hovered between 430 and 450 pounds. At this weight, most men can barely walk. Leon was doing moonsaults. The Vader saw became his signature. Seeing a man of his girth climb to the top turnbuckle and rotate backwards through the air was a spectacle that defied physics. It was terrifying and beautiful. It signaled to the audience that this wasn't just a fat man. This was a super athlete. He feuded with the new generation of Japanese stars, Tatsumi Fujinami, Riki Choshu, and Shinya Hashimoto. These matches were wars. Leon learned to use his size not just to crush, but to create drama. He learned selling, the art of registering pain to make the opponent look strong. He would let the smaller Japanese wrestlers kick his legs until he collapsed, building sympathy for them, before exploding back with a lariat that would turn them inside out. In April 1989, history was made. A tournament was held to crown the new IWGP Heavyweight Champion. Vader tore through the bracket. In the finals, he defeated Shinya Hashimoto to become the first ever foreigner to hold the title. This was a seismic shift. The UWGP title was the most protected prize in the industry. Giving it to an American was a statement. Vader was no longer an outsider. He was the ace. He was the final boss of the video game, but the physical toll was mounting. The strong style was grinding his joints to dust. His knees, already compromised, were screaming. His back was a knot of spasms. He lived on a cocktail of adrenaline and painkillers, but he couldn't stop. He was the emperor, and an emperor cannot show weakness. If the riot at Sumo Hall was his birth, The night of February 10th, 1990 at the Tokyo Dome was his canonization. The event was called Super Fight in Tokyo Dome. It was an interpromotional supercard, pitting the stars of NJPW against the stars of All Japan Pro Wrestling. Vader was matched against Stan Hansen. Stan Hansen was a cowboy from Texas. He was legally blind without his glasses, a fact that made him notoriously dangerous in the ring. He couldn't see depth, so he simply hit everything as hard as he could to make sure he connected. He was known for the lariat, a clothesline that felt like being hit by a truck. Vader versus Hansen was a dream match. Two massive, stiff, brawling Americans in front of 60,000 screaming Japanese fans. It was Godzilla versus King Kong. The match began with a violence that shocked even the hardened Tokyo audience. They weren't wrestling. They were mugging each other. Fists were flying. These were two alpha males, neither willing to give an inch, testing each other's chin. Then disaster struck. They were in the corner, trading blows. Hansen, swinging wildly with his thick-taped hand, threw a thumb towards Vader's face. It was meant to be a grazing blow, a working punch, but Hansen's aim was off, and Vader was moving forward. The thumb dug deep into the orbital socket of Vader's left eye. The mechanics of the injury are gruesome. The pressure of the thumb shattered the fragile bones of the infraorbital floor, the shelf that the eye sits on. With the bone broken and the pressure mounting, the eyeball was displaced. It popped out. This is not a figure of speech. Leon's left eye was physically protruding from his skull, resting on his cheek, held in place only by the optic nerve and the distended eyelids. The pain was a white-hot supernova in the center of his brain. His vision in that eye went black, then red. In any other sport, boxing, MMA, football, the match stops instantly. Doctors rush in. The broadcast cuts away. But this was wrestling, and this was Leon White. In a moment that has been analyzed, slowed down, and horrified over for decades, Vader did the unthinkable. He didn't drop to his knees. He didn't scream for the referee. He reached up with his massive taped hand, cupped his own displaced eye, and shoved it back into his head. The footage is grainy, but you can see the motion. It is mechanical, desperate, and sickening. He forced the organ back into the shattered socket. And then he turned back to Hansen. "You motherfucker," he roared, his voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. He kept fighting. For another 20 minutes, his eye immediately swelled shut, the eyelids turning a grotesque shade of purple and black, ballooning to the size of a tennis ball. He was fighting blind on one side, his depth perception gone, his head throbbing with the pulse of a concussion. Hansen, realizing he had hurt him, but respecting the toughness, didn't let up. They continued to batter each other. They brawled into the crowd. They hit each other with chairs. Vader took suplexes. He took clotheslines. Every impact must have felt like a hammer blow to his broken face. The match ended in a double countout, a non-finish that protected both men. But the result didn't matter. When Vader walked to the back, clutching a towel to his face, he was no longer just a wrestler. He had crossed a threshold into something else. He had proven that he was willing to mutilate himself for the show. He had proven that the monster mask wasn't a costume. It was the truth. He required reconstructive surgery. Metal plates were inserted into his face to rebuild the orbital floor. The doctors told him he was lucky he didn't lose the eye permanently. They told him to rest, to take months off. He was back in the ring weeks later. By the end of 1990, Vader was arguably the best wrestler on the planet. He was the IWGP champion. He was a millionaire. He was a legend in Japan. But the Leon White who looked in the mirror was disintegrating. The face that stared back was scar tissue and swelling. The knees were grinding, bone on bone. The heart, pumping blood through a body that was too big and too stressed, was beginning to work overtime. He was entering his mid-30s. He had achieved everything he set out to do in Japan, but the addiction to the spotlight is a powerful thing. He heard whispers of interest from the United States. WCW, World Championship Wrestling, was looking for a monster. Leon looked at his broken face. He looked at his bank account. He looked at the mask. He decided it wasn't enough. He wanted to conquer America. He wanted to bring the pain home. In 1992 and 1993, Vader was the centerpiece of the promotion. He captured the WCW World Heavyweight Championship 3 times. He wasn't a transitional champion, he was the final boss. He defeated Sting. He retired the legendary Nikita Koloff. He broke the back of the Barbarian. He was the standard bearer for a style of wrestling that prioritized realism over showmanship. During this period, Leon White was arguably the best wrestler on the planet. He was working a schedule that would kill a normal man, flying back and forth between big shows in Japan and tours in the U.S., wrestling the hardest-hitting matches in both hemispheres. His knees were eroding, his back was a constant source of agony, but the red light was on and the money was good. One of the most significant moments of his career, and one that speaks to Leon White's professionalism, occurred on August 2nd, 1992, in Baltimore, Maryland. Vader was the champion. His opponent was Ron Simmons, a former college football powerhouse like himself. The decision was made. Simmons would defeat Vader to become the first recognized African-American world heavyweight champion in history. In professional wrestling, the loser is just as important as the winner. If Vader had resisted, if he had sandbagged, if he had made Simmons look weak, the moment would have failed. Instead, Leon White went out and made Ron Simmons look like a god. He bumped for him. He sold his fear. He let Simmons power slam him, all 450 pounds of him, cleanly in the center of the ring. When the referee counted 3, the crowd exploded in a mix of joy and shock. It was a historic moment for race relations in sports entertainment, and it was built on the back of the monster. Vader understood the business. He knew that for the hero to shine, the dragon must die with dignity. But the violence of Vader's style was not without consequence. He worked snug. He hit hard. He expected to be hit hard in return. This philosophy culminated in the most gruesome injury of the decade, the Munich incident of 1994. Vader was wrestling Cactus Jack, Mick Foley, during a European tour. Foley was a stuntman in a wrestler's body, a man who built his career on taking insane risks. They were having a brawl in Munich, Germany. The ring ropes had been tightened excessively by a local crew who didn't understand wrestling mechanics. During a spot where Foley was to be entangled in the ropes, disaster struck. Vader charged. Foley ducked. Vader's massive forearm smashed into the back of Foley's head, trapping Foley's neck between the top and middle ropes. The tension was too high. The ropes acted like a garrote. As Foley struggled to free himself, the elevator effect of the ropes tore at his right ear. When he finally wrenched himself free, the ear didn't come with him. 2/3 of Mick Foley's ear was ripped clean off his skull. The referee, displaying a stomach of iron, picked up the cartilage from the canvas and handed it to the ring announcer. In a normal world, the match stops. Ambulances are called. In the world of Vader and Cactus Jack, the match continued. Vader, seeing the blood pouring from the side of Foley's head, didn't back off. He attacked the wound. He punched the bloody stump. It was barbaric. It was uncomfortable to watch, but it was exactly what the character demanded. Vader was a shark. Blood only made him frenzied. The image of Vader battering a one-eared man became part of the folklore. It cemented his reputation as the most dangerous man in the industry. If you stepped in the ring with Vader, you might leave a piece of yourself behind. However, the landscape of WCW began to shift in 1994 with the arrival of Hulk Hogan. Hogan was not just a wrestler, he was a political entity. He brought his own friends, his own creative control, and his own vision of what wrestling should be. Hogan's vision did not include a 450-pound monster who hit people for real. Hogan wanted cartoon villains who bumped around and made him look good. The dream match between Vader and Hogan was set for Super Brawl 5 in 1995. It should have been the biggest financial draw in company history. Instead, it was a political mess. Vader was told to tone it down. He was told to look weaker. In the match, Vader dominated the action, but the finish was a clumsy disqualification. The aura of invincibility was being chipped away. Vader was no longer the unstoppable force. He was just another bad guy for Hogan to vanquish. The frustration began to mount. Leon White knew his worth. He knew he was the best big man in the world. But in the Hogan era, meritocracy was dead. The end of his WCW run did not come in the ring, but in a locker room in one of the most infamous backstage fights in history. It was August 1995. Tensions were high. Vader was late for a TV taping, and Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful, was the road agent in charge. Orndorff was a legend in his own right, but he was older, smaller, and had a withered right arm from an old injury. An argument started. Vader, stressed and aggressive, got in Orndorff's face. Words turned to shoves. Then the unthinkable happened. Orndorff, wearing flip-flops, punched the 450-pound monster in the face. Vader went down. Orndorff kicked him in the face with his sandal-clad foot. It was a swift, humiliating beatdown. The fight shattered the mystique. The monster had been dropped by a retired wrestler in flip-flops. Word spread instantly. The office used the incident as a pretext. Vader was fired. He left WCW with a legacy of violence and excellence, but also with a bitter taste in his mouth. He had given his body to the company. He had bled for them. He had made their heroes look like superstars. And in the end, he was discarded because of a locker room scrap and backstage politics. Leon White was now 40 years old. His knees were shot. His shoulder was a wreck. He was heavy, too heavy. He had been fired from the number 2 company in America. Most men would have retired. Most men would have looked at the bank account and the medical charts and walked away. But Leon White was an addict. He was addicted to the adrenaline, to the lifestyle, and to the validation of the crowd. He couldn't stop. He picked up the phone. There was only one place left to go in America, the World Wrestling Federation. Vince McMahon was waiting. The monster was heading to New York, hoping for a resurrection, but walking unknowingly toward his greatest professional humiliation. In late 1995, the World Wrestling Federation was in the midst of an identity crisis. The cartoon era of Hulk Hogan was dead, and the new generation, led by smaller athletic performers like Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, was struggling to capture the casual audience. Vince McMahon, the architect of modern wrestling, needed a villain. He needed a monster so terrifying that the fans would pay to see him beaten. He looked at the tapes from Japan and WCW, and he saw Leon White. Leon entered the WWF with a reputation that preceded him like a thunderclap. He was the man they call Vader. The promotional machine went into overdrive. Vignettes aired on television showing a destructive force of nature. For Leon, this was supposed to be the coronation. He had conquered Europe. He had conquered Japan. He had dominated WCW. The WWF was the final piece of the puzzle, the platform that would make him a household name globally. He debuted at the Royal Rumble in January 1996 in Fresno, California. The Royal Rumble is a chaotic match often used to showcase new talent, but Vader's entrance was designed to stop the show. He marched out with his mastodon helmet steam billowing and entered the ring with a violence that unsettled the other wrestlers. He eliminated 4 men in minutes. He murdered Savio Vega. He threw Doug Gilbert over the top rope so hard it looked like a car crash. But even on that first night, the cracks in the foundation appeared. Vader was working Vader style, heavy, stiff, and real. The WWF roster, however, was accustomed to a lighter, safer style. When Vader started throwing his trademark sledgehammer blows, the other wrestlers didn't see realism. They saw a reckless coworker. He was eliminated by Shawn Michaels, a foreshadowing of the political war to come, but the narrative was set. A new monster was in town. To cover for Leon's lack of microphone skills, he was articulate, but his voice didn't match the terrifying visual. McMahon paired him with Jim Cornette. Cornette was the greatest talker in the business, a loudmouth manager who could incite a riot with a microphone. He dubbed Vader the crown jewel of Camp Cornette. The pairing was electric. Cornette provided the heat, Vader provided the hurt. However, behind the curtain, a culture war was brewing. The WWF locker room in 1996 was dominated by the Clique, a group of friends led by Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Triple H. They held immense political sway over Vince McMahon. They dictated the style, the storylines, and the winners. Shawn Michaels, the reigning WWF champion, was a brilliant performer but notoriously difficult to work with. He was smaller, faster, and prioritized athleticism over the bruising realism that Vader brought. Vader's style was a problem. In Japan, hitting hard was a sign of respect. In the WWF, it was a liability. Wrestlers complained to management that Vader was too stiff. They said he was dangerous. They said he smelled bad, a cruel exaggeration used to undermine his professional standing. Leon, who took immense pride in his work, was confused. He was doing exactly what had made him a legend for a decade. Why was it wrong now? He tried to adapt. He pulled his punches. He softened his landings. But a neutered monster is just a fat man in a singlet. The audience could sense the hesitation. The aura of danger that surrounded him in WCW began to evaporate. The plan for the summer of 1996 was simple on paper. Vader would build momentum and eventually defeat Shawn Michaels for the WWF Championship at Survivor Series. It was the classic David versus Goliath story. Vader was the unstoppable force. Michaels was the resilient hero. The feud culminated at SummerSlam 1996 in Cleveland, Ohio. The match was billed as the ultimate clash of styles. But the real fight wasn't the scripted one. It was the political one happening in real time. During the match, things went wrong. Vader, perhaps overthinking due to the backstage pressure, missed a cue. He was supposed to move out of the way of a diving elbow drop from Michaels. He didn't move fast enough. Michaels landed on his feet, broke character on live pay-per-view, and screamed at Vader, "Move!" He then kicked Vader in the head, a genuine kick of frustration, not a wrestling move. It was a moment of supreme unprofessionalism by the champion, but it destroyed the challenger. By screaming at the monster like a petulant child, Michaels stripped Vader of his mystique. He showed the world that the monster was incompetent. The original booking plan, rumored to be a Vader victory, or at least a protected finish, was changed. Michaels won. He pinned the monster. In the locker room afterward, the narrative was solidified. Vader couldn't work the WWF style. He was unsafe. He was clumsy. The planned title run was scrapped. Leon White's dream of being the WWF champion died that night in Cleveland. He wasn't the main event anymore. He was meat. Frustrated and marginalized, Leon's temper began to fray. In April 1997, during a promotional tour in Kuwait, he appeared on the television show Good Morning Kuwait. The host, perhaps trying to be provocative, asked him if wrestling was fake. In the old days, protecting the business was the first law of wrestling. Vader snapped. He flipped the table. He grabbed the host by the tie and shook him, asking if it felt fake. It was a moment of impulsive anger, meant to defend his profession, but it backfired spectacularly. He was arrested in Kuwait. He was detained for days. The WWF had to pay a massive fine to get him out. When he returned to the U.S., he was in the doghouse. Vince McMahon, who usually loved controversy, saw Vader as a liability. The punishment was severe, jobbing. Vader was booked to lose constantly. He lost to The Undertaker. He lost to newcomers. He lost to mid-card talent. The man who had rioted Sumo Hall was now slipping on banana peels for comedy. The humiliation was compounded by the physical disintegration of Leon's body. The human shoulder is a complex joint, not designed to support 400-plus pounds, crashing onto it nightly. By 1997, Vader's right shoulder was garbage. The rotator cuff was torn completely. Doctors told him he needed immediate surgery. But in the shark tank of the WWF, taking time off meant losing your spot. Leon was already on thin ice. He feared that if he left for surgery, he would be fired. So he made a decision that would haunt him forever. He kept wrestling. He couldn't lift his right arm above his head. He had to alter his entire moveset. He couldn't bench press. He couldn't train properly. Without the ability to lift weights and do cardio, his weight ballooned. He went from a solid 400 pounds to a soft, watery 450, then 460. He looked bloated. He breathed heavy. He was in agony every time he hit the mat. The locker room sharks circled. They mocked his weight. They mocked his breathing. They called him the Mastodon, not with reverence, but with disgust. The lowest point came in 1998. The writers, seeing a depressed and broken man, decided to turn his reality into a storyline. It was a cruel form of reality TV before the term existed. They put a microphone in front of him after a loss to the wrestler Kane. Kane was the new monster, masked, silent, terrifying. He was everything Vader used to be. Vader was the old model being discarded for the upgrade. On live television, Leon White looked into the camera. His eyes were sad, sunken into his swollen face. He delivered the line they wrote for him, "I'm just a fat piece of shitey." It wasn't a promo. It was a confession. It was Leon White, the All-American, the IWGP champion, the WCW World Champion, admitting that they had broken him. He was acknowledging that the industry had taken his dignity. He fell into a deep depression. He was drinking heavily to numb the shoulder pain and the emotional shame. He would sit in hotel rooms, staring at the empty bottles, wondering where the baby bull had gone. He was making good money, but he was spiritually bankrupt. By late 1998, Leon couldn't take it anymore. He negotiated his release from the WWF. He walked out the door with his body in ruins and his reputation in tatters. The American experiment had failed. He had arrived in 1996 as a conqueror. He left in 1998 as a cautionary tale. The WWF had taken the greatest super heavyweight in history and turned him into a punchline. But Leon White was not done. He was broken, yes. He was fat, yes. He was an alcoholic, yes. but he still had one place where he was a god. He still had Japan. He packed his bags for Tokyo again. He was going back to the only place that ever truly understood him. He was going back to die in the ring because living in the real world had become impossible. When Leon White boarded the plane to Tokyo in late 1998, he was leaving behind a country that had turned him into a punchline. He landed in All Japan Pro Wrestling, a promotion run by the legendary Giant Baba. Baba was a traditionalist. He didn't care about sports entertainment or comedy skits. He cared about size, toughness, and credibility. He looked at the battered 43-year-old Leon White and saw value. Leon wasted no time in rebuilding his legacy. He formed a stable with his old rival Stan Hansen, the man who had blinded him in 1990. Together, they were a terrifying wall of beef and bad attitude. In 1999, Leon achieved the impossible. He defeated Akira Taue to win the Triple Crown Heavyweight Championship. This was historic. The Triple Crown is one of the most prestigious titles in wrestling history, representing the unification of 3 different belts. By winning it, Vader became the first man, and remains the only man, to have held the IWGP Heavyweight Championship, the Triple Crown, and the UWA World Heavyweight Championship. He had conquered the 3 major global territories outside of the U.S. For a brief window from 1999 to 2001, Leon found peace. He was respected. The matches were brutal. Fighting legends like Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi took a heavy toll on his already ruined body, but the paycheck and the adulation were real. He wasn't a fat piece of tea here. He was Vader-san, the monster who refused to die. But time is undefeated. In 2000, Giant Baba died, and Japanese wrestling fractured. A massive exodus of talent formed a new company, Pro Wrestling Noah. Leon followed the money and the talent to Noah, capturing the GHC Tag Team Championship with Scorpio. But the cracks were widening. By the mid-2000s, Leon was pushing 50. His knees were virtually non-existent. He had undergone countless surgeries to clean out bone chips and repair ligaments. His back was a fused mess of calcium deposits and arthritis. He could still move for short bursts, but the Vader Saw was becoming a dangerous gamble every time he climbed the ropes. He began the slow, painful drift into the independent circuit. This is the purgatory of the wrestling legend. When the big contracts from NJPW and Noah dried up, Leon returned to America, not to stadiums, but to high school gymnasiums and armories. He wrestled for TNA briefly, but it was clear he was a shadow of his former self. He wrestled for local promoters who scraped together a few $1,000s just to put Vader on the poster. It was a humbling existence. He would arrive at these small shows, limping heavily, carrying his massive gear bag. He would sit in a folding chair in a locker room full of kids who grew up worshiping him. They looked at him with a mix of awe and pity. He was still drinking. He was still eating to maintain the gimmick. The weight hovered dangerously around 400 pounds. He was a biological machine running on fumes, refusing to shut down because he didn't know how to operate in silence. In 2012, WWE called. It wasn't for a Hall of Fame induction or a Legends contract. It was for a one-off cameo on Monday Night Raw to squash a comedy jobber named Heath Slater. Leon took the booking. He showed up, put on the mask, and walked down the ramp. The crowd pop was nostalgic, but seeing him up close in HD was jarring. He looked old. He moved slowly. During the match, he slipped while trying to get into the ring. He stumbled. It was a small moment, but it highlighted the reality. The monster was tired. He won the match, hit a safe version of the Vader bomb, and left. It was a nice moment, but it was charity. It was the industry throwing a bone to a dog they had kicked out years ago. The turning point, the beginning of the end, came in November 2016. Leon was involved in a car rollover accident in Boulder, Colorado. He was knocked unconscious. He was rushed to the hospital. While treating him for the trauma of the crash, doctors ran a routine battery of tests on his heart. They saw something that made them freeze. Leon's heart was failing. The official diagnosis was congestive heart failure. It was the result of 40 years of abuse, football, wrestling, massive weight gain, alcohol, painkillers. The heart is a muscle, and Leon had forced his to pump blood through a body the size of a grizzly bear for 6 decades. It was worn out. The doctors measured his ejection fraction, the percentage of blood leaving the heart each time it contracts. A healthy person is around 55 to 70%. Leon was significantly lower. His heart was essentially flabby and enlarged, struggling to push fluid through his system. 2 different heart specialists gave him the same prognosis. You have 2 years to live, maximum. Most men, upon receiving a death sentence, would retreat. They would spend time with family. They would make peace. Leon White went on Twitter. He announced the diagnosis to the world, but almost immediately began to fight it. He publicly disputed the doctors. He claimed he was getting better using DDP yoga. He posted videos of himself working out, sweating, breathing heavy, trying to prove the medical science wrong. It was a public display of the same stubbornness that had made him a star. He treated death like a booker who told him he was going to lose. "That doesn't work for me, brother," was his attitude. But privately, the fear was eating him alive. He knew. He could feel it in his chest when he walked upstairs. He could feel the fluid building up in his lungs. In a bizarre final chapter, Vader found himself relevant again in 2016, but for the wrong reasons. A clip of a match between 2 young high flyers, Will Ospreay and Ricochet, went viral. It was a dazzling display of gymnastics, flips, and superhero landings. Vader, sitting at home, saw it and hated it. He tweeted that it looked like a gymnastics routine and that they were killing the business because nobody was selling pain. The internet exploded. The old guard sided with Vader. The new generation called him a bitter old dinosaur. Will Ospreay, seeing an opportunity, challenged Vader. A promoter in England booked the match. Vader versus Will Ospreay. The monster versus the aerial assassin. Leon White, with a failing heart and 2 bad knees, flew to London in August 2016. The match was difficult to watch. Ospreay had to literally carry the 400-pound legend through the spots. Vader could barely move. He was blown up within minutes. But the finish? Vader won. Even at the bitter end, Leon White protected the character. He refused to let the monster lose to a cruiserweight. He chokeslammed Ospreay and pinned him. It was his last major stand. He stood in the ring in York Hall, sweating profusely, clutching his chest, listening to the cheers and the boos. He had proven his point in his mind. He had proven that size still mattered. As 2017 rolled in, the clock the doctors had set was ticking down. Leon became obsessed with one thing: the WWE Hall of Fame. It wasn't about the ring or the plaque. It was about validation. He wanted Vince McMahon to acknowledge him. He wanted his son Jesse to see him honored. He wanted to know that his sacrifice meant something. He did interviews. He campaigned on social media. Fans started petitions. Mick Foley, the man whose ear Vader had torn off, begged WWE to induct him while he was still alive. But the call didn't come. The 2017 ceremony passed. Vader was ignored. Leon was crushed. He continued to wrestle sporadically in Japan. taking bumps he had no business taking, risking cardiac arrest every time he hit the mat. In April 2017, during a ceremony at Korakuen Hall in Tokyo, he collapsed. The audience went silent. He had passed out from dehydration and heart strain. He recovered, but the visual was terrifying. The invincible Vader was crumbling before their eyes. He returned to the U.S., spending his days in Colorado, waiting. The fluid retention was getting worse. His breathing was becoming a labor. The 2 years were almost up. The monster was finally, truly alone with the man inside. By the spring of 2018, the defiance Leon White had shown the world, the workout videos, the claims of recovery, could no longer mask the biological reality. His heart, enlarged and exhausted from pumping blood through a 400-pound frame for decades, was beating out of rhythm. Pneumonia attacked his fluid-filled lungs, leaving the man who once terrorized Tokyo gasping for air in a Colorado hospital bed. In May, he underwent open heart surgery. It was a Hail Mary pass, a desperate attempt to fix the arrhythmia. The surgeons did their job, but Leon's body, depleted by 40 years of physical abuse, had no reserves left to heal. He spent his final month drifting in and out of consciousness, trapped in the wreckage of the vessel that had brought him fame. On June 18, 2018, the fight ended. There was no final bell, no crowd count. Leon White died at the age of 63. The 2-year death sentence given by his doctors in 2016 had been chillingly accurate. It took 4 years for the company to rectify the omission. In April 2022, WWE finally inducted Vader. His son, Jesse White, stood on the stage in Dallas to accept the ring. The crowd cheered and the tribute videos played, but the moment was fundamentally broken. The man who had sacrificed his knees, his eyes, and his dignity for that recognition was 6 feet underground. The industry honored the legend only after the man was no longer a liability. Leon White's life was a transaction he ultimately lost. He built the character of Vader as a shield, a suit of armor made of muscle and fat to protect the insecurity of a failed football player. He wanted to be the biggest, the toughest, and the scariest man in the room so that he would never feel unworthy again. He succeeded. He became a god in Japan and a monster in America. But the armor was too heavy. To maintain the monster, he had to destroy the man. He fed the beast his health, his mobility, and finally, his heart. When we look back at Big Van Vader, we see a triumphant conqueror. But when we look at Leon White, we see a man who was slowly consumed by the very thing he created to save himself. The monster lives forever in the history books, but the man paid the ultimate price for the ink